Okay, so in this video we're going to look at our third-person camera and take a closer look at how the Cinemachine freelook component here is working, and we need to expand under the axis control heading. Take a look at the y-axis and the x-axis stuff, and you'll see it's talking about mouse Y, mouse X, and these are input axis names, and they're referring back to in project settings, input manager. You can see we're not using this anymore. We're using the new input system, but it's referring to mouse X and mouse Y in Cinemachine. So this is why our freelook system isn't working any longer. And it's also why it used to work, right? So first thing I'm going to do, let's just get rid of that. That'll clear up any ambiguity that we're not using this thing. And I want to point out that there's actually a new, let me find a link actually. So there's actually in the new version of, or the newer versions of Cinemachine included with Unity 2020, there's a built-in way to make this pretty easy, where you just add this new script to your, or this new component to your camera or to your object that has the Cinemachine freelook on it. And unfortunately, we are on Unity 2019.4. And now what I don't know, you could try this if you wanted, but I haven't tried it. If I go to Cinemachine here, you can see we're not on the version that has that feature, which is 2.6.3 and above, I guess. We're on 2.3.4, and you can see it says 2019.4 verified. However, I think if I expand this, you can see, I guess we need at least 2.6.4. Is that what it's saying? So maybe this one would work. I don't know. This is not quite that high, but you could try updating it and seeing if that component exists at that point and if it works. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to write a script that manually handles this, because I think it will kind of just give more context on how to use the new input system. But it is important to know that going forward there is an easier way to deal with this. Alright, so what we need to do, much like we did on our player, we need to add a player input component to this camera object as well. This is our virtual camera that has the Cinemachine freelook component on it. So we're going to add a player input component to it because this thing needs to know about player input. And it can use the same input actions that we created earlier, because if you remember, this thing has look already set up and bound. And if we check out look, you can see that it is set up to have multiple bindings, and part of it is the gamepad. There's whatever the joystick setup is. I haven't really looked into how that works so much. But then there's also a pointer. And this is what is going to be used for the mouse. You can see there's control schemes. And so the pointer is used in the keyboard and mouse and the touch control scheme. And pointer is like it's essentially, you can think of it as the same as mouse. If you were making a new input and you chose mouse and then you chose delta, it would work very similarly. My understanding is that the difference is that pointer is incorporating touch and also pin, like if you had a stylus. So pointer works, supports more than just the mouse, and that's kind of the difference. So I don't see why we don't want to support more than just the mouse, so I'll just leave it as it is. But you can note that delta is the kind of data this thing is going to give us. So when the look event happens, it's going to include information about a delta, and that's going to be in the form of a vector 2. And so delta is like a change. So it's, in this case, it's literally going to represent the pixel difference from the mouse on one frame to the next. So if I move my mouse cursor 5 pixels to the right, that vector 2 would have a y value of 0 because I didn't move it up at all, and it would have an x value of 5 because I moved it 5. Now probably I'm moving like way more than 5 when I do that gesture, but you get the idea. It's the change in your mouse cursor position or your pointer position. That's what the delta means. Okay, so that's all already set up, and we added the player input component here. The next thing we need to do is create a script that has access to this Cinemachine freelook thing, because while we can no longer rely on the built-in Cinemachine functionality to just know about an axis name and then just automatically update the axis value based on that axis in the input manager, we can still access this value in our own script and change it. And so you can see, like, as we change this, if I drag, I thought that would actually, well, here, this is the way to look at it, I guess. So if I change the value here, you can see what it's going to do. And I think it's between 0 and 1. So that's what we want to have happen when the cursor Y changes, the pointer Y value changes. I'm just going to put this at 0.5. And then our X over here, this is what we want to have change when the player moves the mouse on the X axis. So I'm going to leave this at 0.2. Actually, this was kind of a little bit of a bug, I guess. When I was starting my game, my camera was all screwy. I wanted to start at 0.5 and 0, I think makes sense for when the game first starts. But after that, I want these values to be driven by the pointer move input action that we have set up there. So to do that, I need to make a script that knows about this component so that it can update these values when that look event happens. So let's go to our scripts folder and create a new C# script, and we can call it, I guess, camera input handler. Just because that's what it's going to do. And we're going to drag this script onto our third-person game camera. And once I know that it's on there, I'm going to double-click it here to open it in Visual Studio. In theory, there you go. And I'm going to get rid of Start and Update. And here's where we need to write our little event handler, but also we need to make sure that we have a reference to that Cinemachine freelook class, or the Cinemachine freelook component that's on this game object, so that we can update its properties. So let's make a field for that. So private Cinemachine freelook, which is going to need a using statement. So I hit Control period after I type that, and it suggests using Cinemachine, so I add that, and that's fine. I can just name it what it suggested, which is the same thing except with a lowercase. I guess I'll go ahead and add start back in and initialize this variable with get component, and we'll enter the type of the component and open close parentheses. And so now when the game starts, we'll search the game object that this script is on for a component of this type and store it in this variable, so then going forward we can use this variable how we want. Now we're going to make our event handler type function, and it has to be public because we're going to keep using Unity events for now. So this will be a public void, and we'll call it onLook. So we want this function to get called every time the player looks, and it needs to have that input system. I can't remember if it's called input system or input action. Let's remember by checking our other one. It's input action dot callback context. So we need that. And this thing needs a using statement as well. So I hit control period and then I hit enter, and inside of that class is something called a callback context, which is just the definition of a type of data, kind of like vector2 is the definition of a type of data. And I'm just going to use the name context, and then we need a open close curly bracket, and this is where we can use the data that is provided whenever the player does the look input. So remember, the look action is giving us a delta in the form of a vector2. So I'm going to say var pointer delta equals context dot read value vector2. All right, and so I was able to use the var keyword here because I know it's going to be of the type vector2, so this is not confusing to a human reader. We know that this is going to have data of the type vector2, so I don't need to write that out twice. We already went over that the delta, the reason I know that that's a delta and it's a vector2 is because the way it's set up in the input actions here. So just one last time, check out look. You can see it's a vector2, and you can see that it's giving us the pointer delta. And so back in our code, now we just need to use that data somehow. So just to remember what it is we need to do with that data, with that input value, if I look at my Cinemachine component one more time, so inside of this component, which I have a reference to in my code, I want to find the y-axis value and the x-axis value and update them based on how the player's moving their mouse. So we'll type in our reference to the Cinemachine component and we'll look and see if we can find that x-axis thing. And you can see it's called m_x-axis. And so inside of that, we want to find something called value, and there it is. So this right here corresponds to this right here. And so we need to change this value based on how far the player has moved the mouse that frame. So we'll say that it equals whatever it used to equal plus the new positional data. So that would be pointer delta dot x, right? So we're dealing with the x-axis. So we want to add to the value of whatever this used to be based on how far the player's moved the mouse cursor to the right or left on the x-axis. And then we want to do the same thing except with y. So we'll go ahead and put that in there and change everything to y. And this one will be y, m_y-axis. Okay, so this is a basic setup, but we're going to see that it's going to be kind of crazy when we try it out in the game. So we're going to go to Unity, let it compile, hit play, and let's see, it's not doing anything for me, so I have to figure out why that is. Never mind, I know why it is. It's because we never subscribed to that event, right? Sure, we went ahead and wrote the event handler, but we have not plugged it into anything. So since we're using Unity events, that means we have to handle that subscription in the Unity editor. So find your player input component. We want to make sure that it's on Unity events for its behavior. And then we're going to expand the events. We're going to expand player, and this time we're dealing with look. So we want to add a handler for the look event, and we're going to drag this camera input handler script in there. This is where we wrote our public function for look. And remember, it has to be public and it has to have a parameter of the type callback context for it to show up here and work correctly. So now hopefully I can look, but I do expect it to be crazy. Yeah, okay. So it's working, but it's like in intensely sensitive. So there's a couple ways we could deal with that. We could probably one good way to deal with it would be to add serialized fields here so that the designer can fine-tune the mouse look sensitivity. But I'm going to show you a different way that's maybe not even as good, but it's useful because it'll show you an element of the new input system that might be useful for you in the future. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my input actions, and I'm going to take a look at the look action here, and you can see there's choices for interactions and processors. So I think interaction is how you would deal with things like if you wanted to have a charged shot in your game where the player is holding the button down. That's how you could kind of set something more complicated up. For us, we want to look at processors, and we want to scale this vector too. So scaling the input is going to be essentially the same in this case as providing a sensitivity for the look action. And it's way too sensitive right now, so the number I put in here needs to be less than 1 so it shrinks the value. So I'm just going to try entering numbers. This is where I think it's not as good to do it this way as it would be with the slider by creating a serialized field here, because unfortunately I'm going to have to save this every time and then try it out. So I only changed the X, so I'm going to try to avoid evaluating the Y, which is still going to be really nuts. But X is going actually pretty good, I think. And at this point, the Y is too distracting to even understand how my X is doing. So I'm going to make this one even smaller because the X is like in this widescreen, I have a lot more room to move. Y is like a smaller amount of pixels, so it's just like inherently needs less sensitivity. This is still crazy because I forgot to save. Let's save it. Now run it. And that's actually not so bad. And turns out maybe I need more sensitivity on my X. So let's try just 0.1 on this. I don't think I saved. So the ability to kind of make hot fixes while the game is running in Unity when you expose variables to the editor with serialized field is really useful, and you can kind of see when you're dealing with this where you have to stop it, save it, run it again. It's just a much slower workflow. But like I said, I just wanted to show you how this processor feature worked, and I think I'm in business now. This feels pretty okay to me. Feel free to customize it as you see fit, but in general, I'd say we've got our game working with the new input system. There is one last thing I want to do. So I'm going to stop the game. I'm going to close this. You might notice in the console we are still getting yelled at a whole bunch. And if I click this one now, maybe I have to click off of it and click again. Alright, so if you double click it, it's going to take you to this input system or event system game object. And the event system gets added whenever you create a UI object for the first time on a canvas. And the event system is how the canvas reads input, and so when you click on the button it actually knows what to do. And by default the event system is going to be using the old input manager setup, and we just had to tell it use the new one. And so I click this button and it's going to fill in all this by default, but you could customize it. So if you wanted, I'm going to clear that and go back to my input actions. It's using all of these defaults that got created when we first made our input actions action set thing. And so it's not handy that all these things get made automatically, and then they all get mapped automatically in the event system when I clicked that button. But if you wanted to, you could make new actions and bindings and plug them all in here as you saw fit. Or you could just not even use the event system and like code your own setup. So there's a lot of options and versatility, but this is fast and useful. We don't really have any interactive UI that you can click on or anything in this game, but just doing that is enough to get rid of my annoying error that was getting printed every frame. Alright, so now we are fully operational with the new input system. I'm going to save everything and I'm going to commit, and I guess I closed GitHub here. So let's just say what we did. We created an input handler to use the new input system for Cinemachine. That's good enough. Alright, so I'm going to commit this thing and I will push it, and we have our new our new input system functionality in place.